think. Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Roger Homefield, and first I'd like to thank Sandy Koplowitz for thinking enough of me to suggest my speaking here today. So he's the guy to see if you don't like what I do. I look forward to fielding your questions after I'm done talking in a few hours. You know, this thing. Okay, this morning's topic will be the musician's perspective from the bandstand, or my perspective, American big bands. And to understand my perspective, maybe you have to understand my personal perspective. And so let me give you my state of music review. Before September 11th, live music was my big cause de celeb. The Las Vegas production shows had begun using pre-recorded tracks for many years now. The cruise ships, Broadway shows, even your club date bands, which did weddings and bar mitzvahs, started having to use either pre-recorded tracks or synthesized, computerized tracks. Hollywood began using synthesized tracks instead of the once great orchestrations for theme songs of television shows like Ironside, or The Fugitive, or Streets of San Francisco. Perhaps you remember, just to give you an idea, as far as all these television shows that were network shows, all had great orchestras and orchestrations and creative themes for those shows, and that kind of went by the wayside. The Las Vegas production shows, well, the way it started was they would put the bands either down in the pit or back behind the scrim, sort of out of sight, out of mind. Slowly but surely, more and more of these show bands were wearing headphones. When you see musicians wearing headphones, what they're doing is they're playing along with click tracks. It's like Alfalfa and his gang, you know, when they used to put the phonograph on and stand behind the curtain. I mean, it's absurd. It really is, it's anti-musical is what it is. And then eventually, musicians in shows that were always live music acts, well, now they were starting to get completely replaced by the tracks altogether. Now, some of you may think, well, what's wrong with that? Well, firstly, by replacing the human conductor with a click track, there is zero spontaneity from show to show. Yes, each audience is seeing the exact same product, but the lack of live risk-taking and the slight changes in the tempos diminishes the excitement and human elements of the performance for the dancers as well as the musicians. Now, there was never any shortage of good musicians. Let's talk about cruise lines, for example, where I've been musician, musical director, and I had my own music act on ships. The money they spend on click tracks for their Las Vegas production shows is incredible. The money they spend on those click tracks is more than enough money to have like a world-class orchestra on the ship. It's more than enough money for you to walk in and have two timpani drummers up there and the whole 9 yards in a small string section, but they spend it all on the click track. It's unfortunate because it's not nearly as exciting as what they could have with the real McCoy. Now, I hate to think that I was part of the beginning of the end. In 1971, I was playing with a pirate company doing a combination of Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. It was a 13-piece band and 16 singers, performing singers. We were in the theater at the International in Las Vegas while Elvis was in the main room. Now the theater, it had a sound booth at the top of the balcony. And Michael Mann, who was producing this thing, he wanted the singers to crawl on their stomachs on one particular scene. Now, going against our better judgment, the band agreed to record that particular scene. Well, they did such a good job recording us in that booth that when they were able to punch in the tape and then go back to live with no one noticing, well, I hate to think that I was involved in the birth of recorded tracks for use in live shows.
Is that your permission?
Well, it's a 29-piece ensemble, and you're in a tough situation when everybody's asked to go along with the same thing, and it was, oh, it's just from letter B to C, it's just from letter B to C, yeah, and the next 30 years as well is what it may have ended up being, not just letter B to C. So today, whenever you see any cruise ship floor show, the music is assisted by recorded tracks, and you'll see them wearing the headphones, the musicians, so they can play along with the click tracks. Now, on a more positive note, it was always my fervent belief that if gangster kids were forced, regardless of how many times, to listen to the Stan Kenton Orchestra live with its 5 trumpets, 5 trombones, and 5 saxophones, playing a building, powerful orchestration of any standard ballad, that it would rewire their brains and they would be incapable of committing wanton violence. Now, I know that sounds radical. It's not medically proven. I'm not Sigmund Freud, but I believe a really good big band has that power. I mean, I can't imagine that the same mind that can actually process the colors and dynamics of a powerful orchestration, a mind that can actually process that cannot turn around and be sadistic. I just don't think it's possible. Certainly the same argument could easily be made for symphony orchestras, not just big bands. Now, you take rap today, and I don't know about you, but it makes me want to go out and kill somebody. And you just can't get away. I can't believe how many decades it's stayed around. I just cannot believe it. And you hear about things sucking the oxygen out of the room. Nothing sucks the oxygen out of the room more than rap music and just the pop culture in general when it comes to the arts. Now, the volume, the sheer volume, coming from a rock band is different. It doesn't count. It doesn't count because it's just electronic music controlled by a knob and coming through speakers. Oh, it'll be loud enough to make you deaf. But the sound waves are not man-made, and the volume you're hearing is that from a volume knob and not the collective strength and power of a band of musicians that are playing literally from the guts and their abdomens. That's because the sound waves coming off the bandstand are created from the abdomen and the strength of each individual player. You can actually feel the sound pushing you back. The acoustic sound waves pushing you back are coming directly from the band's guts, literally. So when you hear a crescendo or an increase in volume, you also feel it. I was very fortunate to catch the home stretch of the big band era. I played every Newport Jazz Festival with one big band or another between 1975 and 1981. In 1975, when I first went out with the major bands, the bands on the road at that time were Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson, Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, Harry James, Duke Ellington, and Count Basie. I proudly refer to the Triple Crown when describing my playing lead trombone on extended tours with the 3 of the iconic bands, Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson, and Stan Kenton. We played the world, playing nightly sellout concerts. Literally one-nighters 95, 98% of the time. So, how did I get to sit in those chairs? Sandy, thanks for asking. I started playing classical violin at 5. I had the advantage of watching my sisters take lessons for 2 years because they were older than me. And in Westchester County, New York, I was able to achieve becoming the concertmaster in their 1962 all-county orchestra. And that was a real thrill. Just hearing the orchestra tune up was a big thrill. Then a band teacher, Dr. Albright, he suggested to my father that because the violin is so difficult to play in tune, there's no frets and it's very close, that hey, trombone, it's very similar. It's got the slide, there's no valves. Gee, Doc Homefield, he says, my father says, he should play the trombone. And I guess they were short trombone players. Yeah. Well, you can't march behind the cheerleaders with a violin, so the trombone it did become. And at 17, I started playing professional trombone at Your Father's Mustache in New York City, down in the Village, 7th Avenue and 10th Street. And I won't get into any of those stories now, but after several interesting rock bands, like the Canadian Rock Theater, I had the opportunity to go to the Berklee College of Music, that's in Boston, Berklee College of Music in Boston, and become a more serious musician. There were many great people there, and I knew that Berklee was a spawning ground for players on the Buddy Rich Band. And I figured if I succeeded and if I excelled at Berklee, I'd get an opportunity to play lead trombone on Buddy's band. Well, it did work out that way. Well, what else did it take to get there? Sandy, thanks again for asking. But playing a brass instrument, playing a brass instrument requires musicianship and athleticism. Just think, you could be a great musician, trapped in an unathletic body with no chops. Chops is what we refer to the physical prowess, strength, technical mastery of either the player's embouchure or fingers, depending on what you play the instrument with. Now, Doc Reinhardt, or Dr. Donald S. Reinhardt, he was the greatest brass player's embouchure specialist ever. He taught on Walnut Street in Philadelphia. And coming off of these rock and roll bands, going to Berklee, I soon discovered that I had several different settings to my jaw. I had several different embouchures that I used for different parts of the range. Low, not so low, medium, etc. High, the highest. Now, each embouchure worked just fine within its own range, but the problem is when you try to connect them together. So I traveled from Boston to Philadelphia every month to study with Doc, and he's the only one that ever mapped out the different embouchure types. Downstream, upstream, to the left, to the right. I mean, he had it all mapped out. He's the only one that's ever done that. And he would use a see-through plastic mouthpiece and make a determination of your embouchure type, depending on your airstream and your overbite. Now, Doc Reinhardt discovered what became known in the brass world as the pivot system. The pivot system. I practiced relentlessly, and in 18 months I was playing the lead trombone chair in Berklee's best bands. My chops became indestructible and could have stayed that way, but that's another talk for another day. You know, the problem with picking your career in the music business is that you could have a great future in the business, but there may be no business in the future. Big bands were something that we thought would always be there. It was a stalwart pillar of America, like baseball and apple pie. Remarkably, in what feels like another Forrest Gump moment, I believe I can actually tell you when the big band era ended. I was there. It was 1974. I was finishing up at Berklee, and I went to a club in Beverly, Mass. called Sandy's, by the way, and I knew some of the players on this new band, the Lynn Biviano Orchestra. Lynn Biviano was a very exciting trumpet player and had been made, he was featured so much on Buddy Rich's band that Buddy literally made him a star. And Lynn's band was pretty much a combination of former players from Maynard Ferguson, Woody Herman, and Buddy Rich. As I watched this band, I was extremely impressed with how unique this new world-class band really was. They had their own sound with that rhythm section they had. On the break, I was brought to the dressing room, and I was introduced to Lynn Biviano. I was surprised that he knew who I was. And when he asked if I could tour with the band, I almost dropped dead. He was very talented and charismatic. He was a real showman. And we were scheduled to record an album on Stan Kenton's Creative World, but that was reduced at the last minute to a mere single. And soon the band ran out of money, and that was that. But when Lynn Biviano could not break through as a new big band leader, well, without new leaders, big bands were just playing out until the leaders they had died. And that's what's happened. Ghost bands don't really count. Like, you know, the Glenn Miller band, someone will front it and use that name, but the actual bands died out because we never had any new leaders. Lynn would have been, he would have been the guy for it. Obviously, I thought of it too, but the thing is, Lynn was there. He had it all. He had the band, he had the charts, he had the recognition, he had the charisma, he had it all, and it still didn't happen. Well, what was it like to play in an iconic American big band? Sandy, again, I'm really glad you asked that question, because playing in these bands, it could be somewhat surreal. It really, really was. My first instinct was always the question, is this the real thing, or has it gotten watered down any? You know, now that I'm here, is it still as good as it used to be, that sort of thing? And there was a range of fulfillment, from fulfillment to disappointment. These bands, they all did one-night concerts all over the country. We went out of the country too, but one-nighters everywhere by bus. If we left right after the concert for the next city, that was called a hit and run. So it really was a scramble with the traveling. It was full-time traveling, I'll tell you that. So I told you I played lead for Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson, and Stan Kenton orchestras. Well, I was sitting in my Brighton, Massachusetts apartment practicing, building my chops, following my Doc Reinhardt physical exercises, I got a call from Buddy's manager, Stanley Kay, to join the band to play lead trombone. Now, just to make sure that this was really happening and no one would change their minds, I hopped on a bus from Boston and went down to New York City to pick up that lead trombone book that I'd be playing. And what I picked up was, well, this is what you call a book, except it would have been filled with music that thick. This one happens to be from Stan Kenton. This is a Stan Kenton lead trombone book. Fortunately, while I was on the band, they decided to get new covers, so I really treasure this. When I was on that bus on the way back from New York back to Boston, looking down at that book that said Buddy Rich, Trombone 1, well, I'm smiling just thinking about it. It was a permanent ear-to-ear smile. It was in my hands, and it really was happening. So needless to say, I jumped all over the opportunity to go through the book, the music in the book, so that I didn't have to sight read my first concert with the band, because with the Buddy Rich Band, it was immediately sink or swim, period. This was the tough guy band, but Buddy, in reality, he was also a teddy bear. And but this was the kind of tough guy brand for both the business end of the band and the music end of the band. A lot of musicians were not used to the physical demands and having the chops to play Buddy's music, known as Olympic jazz. Some of them couldn't play, A, with the band playing so loud, or B, while Buddy was yelling at them, or somebody. Now, Buddy never singled out the trombone section. We took care of that early on, but he also got 100%. But some guys were just not equipped to be sitting there trying to play something difficult, and you have this thing up here. You have to be very calm and confident and on top of it. If you're nervous, forget it. The Buddy Rich Band was not your warm, romantic band, like Stan Kenton or Woody Herman. Rather, it was like stepping in the ring with Mike Tyson, who's going to jab you to death in a percussive, violent way. Jabs and knockout punches. The music was often violent, making full use of Buddy's ability and intensity. Intensity is a key word talking about Buddy Rich. By the way, people are always curious, we rarely met any women. They were usually running out of the place in fear, screaming. I mean, even our ballads had a brashness about it, somewhat masculine, if not harsh. Now, I'm not demeaning whatsoever the merit and validity of Buddy's music, not at all. To the contrary, my time with Buddy Rich is among the very, very top for me. I'm proud to have not only been a player, but a personal friend to Buddy. And Buddy Rich was every bit the teddy bear as much as he was the tough guy. I could go on and on and on about some of the drama that was the norm on Buddy's band. If Buddy played the tough guys, because he was somewhat abused at 4 years old, headlining his own vaudeville show called Traps, the Boy Wonder. And then he had to survive the likes of Frank Sinatra, Tommy Dorsey, and that gang. So Buddy learned to keep a tight upper lip. Now, for the most part, Buddy just wanted the band to kick butt. But other times, he might be in pain from his back, from playing catch or something. So if he was in pain, it might not matter how well the band played. And here's a perfect example. The Clearwater Jazz Festival, it was a war on stage. Let me explain. We had a catch. Buddy insisted on having a catch with us, and it must have screwed up his back because he was in pain for the concert. There were 20,000 people out there for the Clearwater Jazz Festival. 20,000 people. The audience was treated to a vintage Buddy in one of his most exciting concerts ever, but little did the audience ever know why. Because Buddy was in pain, it made him hate the band. In this huge concert, he actually tried to train wreck us, his own band. Let me explain train wreck. I guess it's self-explanatory, but if a band has a train wreck, it literally has to stop, like a children's band. He tried to train wreck us in front of 20,000 people by playing less, just a little bit less than 4 bars in a 4-bar drum break, or just a little bit less than 8 bars in an 8-bar drum break. So we're hanging on for dear life, like hanging on to a roller coaster, not to miss our entrances. And so everything was being slingshotted, ricocheting around, and as I told you, the music was already percussive as it was. So by the band tenaciously hanging on to Buddy, not letting him lose us, The war perfectly lent itself to the type of music we were playing. And it was like Buddy Rich and the band on steroids, playing a caricature of ourselves. But out in that audience, it was perfect and cut through the Florida air. As far as what it felt like, on the bandstand, well, to play for Buddy, well, first you had no idea what he was going to do or say. That also included what music he would call. The book was very thick. Any number could come out, you could have to sight read anything at any given time. Excuse me. Then once you started, you better grab onto your seat and get ahead of things. Literally get ahead of things, because things are going to get frantic. And I'm here to lead, not just hang on for dear life. Lead the trombone section, that is. So to sum up what it meant to me, playing lead trombone for Buddy, it was really like playing first base for the New York Yankees. It really, really was. There were certain names I grew up with that had a ring of eternity about it, like it had always been there. Names like Mickey Mantle and Buddy Rich. On Buddy's band, walking out onto that stage was like a football team taking the field. The music was physical, aggressive. Some of the guys, like I say, called it Olympic jazz. Success on that band, business-wise, was getting hired one more time than you were fired. Buddy was very high-strung, like a high-strung Ferrari. He was the best of the best, intense driving, greatest big band drummer ever. The combination of his technique and intensity just set him above and beyond all others. And his band was his best vehicle by far to show it. He would go on the Johnny Carson show all the time, and I would tell him, Buddy, bring the band. Because as good as the Tonight Show band was, it didn't have the pop that he was playing with. And that was really his whole signature. Sometime before my third time on the band, I was literally with him on 3 separate times, I rehearsed and recorded my own jazz orchestra compositions and arrangements in Florida. Buddy listened to the tape and he liked it. He offered me to orchestrate them for his band, and we'd play, and I assume eventually record them. Foolishly, I turned that down because my charts, my arrangements, charts are arrangements, compositions or arrangements, we call them charts. Because my charts were for a larger, broader band like Stan Kenton or my own band. But even though I had the broader sound in mind, in retrospect, even with less brass, Buddy's band would have sounded great, even if not what I first envisioned. All right, I've done a lot about Buddy. I'm going to move on, but I didn't bother to mention I was assistant road manager, which was like road manager because the road manager actually had to be Buddy's valet. So I did all the other stuff. It was a complicated relationship that I had with Buddy. And I wasn't the only one, for sure. But Buddy was extremely complicated, and I'm not so easy myself all the time. And then he went and died on me twice, which is the worst about it. I was over in a boat going to China, and I heard that he was in the hospital, and I wrote a letter in Hawaii on the way to the Mount Sinai Hospital. And then I got a letter from home that he had died. And I didn't understand why it wasn't in the ship's newspaper. Well, the information was wrong, and 10 days later, he actually did die, and then I knew that I had that time that I could have sent a fax. And that's always haunted me. It's so hard to pick something to play, but this is actually, the number I'm going to play here is actually this. This is the original manuscript for Channel One Suite, which was one of his Stallworth charts. So one of the challenges of playing is your page turns. And you have to figure out your page turns well in advance. And sometimes not just for one song. If you know the 10 numbers you're going to play, if they tell you in advance, you got to map that whole thing out, because if you don't have your page turns down, you're going to drive right off the road. Okay, here's Channel One Suite. It takes a couple of minutes. I didn't know whether to try to take little tidbits and tidbits and tidbits, but in any case, here's Channel One Suite. by the way, keep in mind, yeah, let's hear everybody, why not? I mean, I haven't heard this stuff in a long time. In fact, I had a terrible experience about, I don't know how many months ago. I started discovering on YouTube Buddy Rich things and Maynard Ferguson and Stan Kenton, and I got really excited and I became a real fan of the band. And I said, I want to play in those bands. And I had to deal with the reality that I did already 30 years ago. Really, it was like being in the Twilight Zone. I'm not really exaggerating. It was really quite, it was depressing is what it was, because, you know, when you washed up at 30 and then everything is like, crashed downhill from there. I mean, musically, it's just, ooh. Anyway, all right, now Maynard Ferguson. Maynard Ferguson was not going to play or promote my charts for reasons we're not going to bother to get into here today, but besides, it was his band. Now, Maynard Ferguson, he was the, does anybody know who Maynard Ferguson is? Yeah? Okay, well, he was the first super high note trumpet player that was able to play really high and sound great, playing things like Maria way up high, and nobody ever did that before Maynard. He actually played lead trumpet for the Stan Kenton Orchestra when he was 18. Anyway, he was the rock star of these big band leaders. He was flashy, he was hip, and half of the concert was rock and roll. And he had a world-class rhythm section that could play jazz or rock. Now, like I say, Maynard was the first super high note ballad player, and he played on Kenton's band when he was only 18. He left the band, and in the 60s, he assembled the heaviest big band jazz bands anywhere. But this was different. This was new Maynard. He had spent a year in India with Timothy Leary, the Harvard professor from the 60s that said drop out, turn on, and tune in. They took LSD every day, literally. Can you imagine? And it was difficult to have a straight eye-to-eye conversation with Maynard that lasted for more than several seconds. Anyway, it's understandable, I suppose. Anyway, so when I joined the band, things were different than what I had envisioned them to be the whole time. I listened to Maynard Ferguson albums growing up, you know, the incredible, beautiful bands playing the standards and the great arrangements. We wore Japanese happy coats. And Maynard brought back an Indian musician called Vimu Makunda. He brought him on the band for a tour. He played a stringed instrument called the veena. And Vimu, he sat next to me on the bus, and we discussed the biological and metaphysical aspects of life on a nightly basis. And we had a special number for him, which was the only time he played. But this number, it went on forever. And here I am, in my happy coat, looking at my watch and seeing this number, which involved meditation, by the way, on stage, and we're all up there singing, Om, Om. And this thing has taken 23 minutes. You know, I worked my life to get on this band. And so we played the same numbers every night. It wasn't like Buddy. In other words, we were a show. We were a show. By the time I got on the band, it was a show. Hey, don't get me wrong, he was still great. The players he had were great. But we played things like Rocky, and, you know, he did a mix of his old and new, though. Now, walking out on stage for Maynard Ferguson, it was like walking on stage to do a show. And usually to screaming high school kids. That was our genre of fans, for the most part. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Like I said, I get a chance to play with Maynard, who had some of the best orchestras of all time, and now we're doing a stage show, a rock concert in happy coats. I couldn't believe it, but who was I to complain that that's not what Maynard's supposed to be? Right? It's his band. Who am I to say, well, he should have remained poor and broke, because now I'm on the band. So the fact that we were partially a rock show band, and it did not lessen the quality that came off the bandstand every night, that's for sure. I'm going to play you one, maybe two numbers. The first number, it's called Give It One. It's pretty unusual, and you're going to hear the time just turn over. Literally, you're going to hear just, it sounds like it turns over. And then I may let it run for the next thing. I shorten it. It's just part of a rock number they did called Primal Scream. Let's see if I can hit the right buttons here. play just another short
Hey,
clip.
the band.
And you'll see what I mean when I talk about rock. You'll see that it's certainly not like Buddy's music. And piano player playing a synthesizer. All right, everything I'm playing for you today, by the way, was recorded live. They're not off of any albums because, as odd as it sounds, I couldn't find any of mine. I couldn't find my Buddy Rich CD. I was calling Sandy's applauding. It's like they know they know the arrangements. I mean, you know how like kids will scream for a pop tune, I want to hold your hand, you know. Here's a jazz band, and they know the arrangements. They're clapping for the arrangement. It was, I guess, I don't know that we'll ever see those times again. But anyway, here's how we opened the concert.
Mark Colby.
That's the end of Maynard's. It's very dark. The band was a band of love, but the music was melancholy. There's no way. You can hear a pin drop. Thank you. Well, it's borderline too hard to take. To go from that, where you could have thousands of people every night that would listen with their ears and it takes unselfish players to play together, to do all that. Anyway, all right, what did we feel on the bandstand? Thanks again, Sandy, for asking me. But of course, it depended on the individual. But depending on the individual, what we felt on the bandstand, a lot more than you might think. But it also depended on which band we were talking about. On Buddy's band, I felt like a boxer ready to fight. I was literally on the edge of the chair. It was, you know, literally on the, when I say the edge of the chair, I mean the edge of the chair. And you weren't even really sitting. You were kind of like standing. You were kind of squatting because you needed that for the power that was going to be required of you. On Maynard's band, well, like I say, we mostly ran through our same show. So it felt like we were doing a show. I was not that inspired. I was, I suppose, was semi-malcontent. We weren't playing my compositions and stuff. But like I say, it was his band, and God bless him. He was fantastic. Now, but on Stan Kenton's band, there were several moments on Stan Kenton's band where we thought we touched the face of God. That's what it felt like on the Kenton Band. All these bands had their moments, but if you enjoy the textures and sheets of sound and the mood changes of an orchestra with the greatest of dynamic range bordering on melodramatic, then you, like me, would prefer the Kenton Band. Its intentions were pure. And in just winding up, folks, it's just that, I'd like to say that America and big bands were a perfect match. Baseball and big bands, mom and apple pie. But electronic rock bands had advantage over acoustic bands on live TV. They were electric, going through an electric medium. Horns had to be mic'd, and their sound depended completely on some sound band. But big bands and baseball have always been the face of America. How many pictures would make a viewer immediately think of America like a picture of baseball or a picture of big bands? And it's not just the face, it's the personality. In baseball, there's the argument with the umpires. And in big bands, the free, adventurous compositions and orchestrations are the result of living in a free, vibrant America. And I was extremely lucky to be part of it. I thought it would never end. The death of big bands is a terrible thing, but operas and orchestras could be next. Now, if the soul of society is represented by its art, and if that's the window to its soul, you cannot have phony art. You can't have phony art, click tracks, and tapes, especially on Broadway and Radio City, and cruise ships, fine. If they feel they can't get players, that's ridiculous, they can. But there's just really no excuse for it. It's not even a financial advantage, because like I say, they could have had far better product for that money. So this is why big bands, it would be great if big bands, not just big bands, but orchestras. Sandy's girlfriend's an opera singer. Big bands, orchestras, operas, they need to be able to play within our society, because real music, now real music is music that is for music's sake. Real music is you write some music for the purpose of expression, period. That's real music. And real live music, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And we've been sorely lacking it, along with many other things over the past decades. Would you like to hear how Kenton closed his concert? And that's the end of my talk, and I'll be very happy to take questions. Would you like to hear Artistry and Rhythm? You heard how he opened the show, with that body and soul, with that this is how he closed it. Now, I did the same thing on this. He starts off with the piano intro. It goes on probably for a good minute and a half. I squeezed it down to be much shorter, and then it goes into Artistry and Rhythm. A very different type of, well, far out, huh? Here's the original manuscript. Original lead trombone part of this Artistry and Rhythm. The signature theme. very sweet. I didn't know that I was going to take this long. It was unintentional, but you've been very patient. I really do appreciate that. That's the guy to see if you have any problems. But if you're not too worn out, I'd love to take some questions if you have any, if I haven't worn you all out too much. Yes, dear?
What's the difference between a trombone and a chainsaw?
With a chainsaw, you can make money.
That's even better.
That's an easy one.
I always thought it was because you could tune a chainsaw.
Oh. Well, no, when I had my chops, that's one thing. When I had the right resonance, and you knew when you actually had a note at 100% vibration and resonance, nothing was better than that. And if you got two players together, just two players, playing dead in tune, to where there were no beats, whoa, 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 where you both played exactly, what a beautiful sound. But yeah, you're right about that. Many trombone players, look, if you can't play in tune, the thing's not going to sound pretty. Look, there were jazz players, I was more of a pretty boy player. Yes, sir?
Is there ever a place for vocals
For vocalists?
in this sort of...
Yeah, far away. No, I'm just kidding. Stan used to say about June Christie, his third wife, he'd say, June Christie, she's a disease. Well, okay, maybe it wasn't funny. Is there a place for vocalists? Of course, of course. Not in Stan's band. I mean, there were certain bands where they had vocalists and others that they didn't. I think Tommy Dorsey used vocalists, but Stan didn't use singers. Maynard Ferguson always talked about how instrumental music is the most spiritual, and as a result, I have never been able to understand any lyrics. I can't understand them, and even if I do hear them and understand them, then I don't understand what they mean. I'm not. That part of my brain is like very low. But singers, all right, that's a really, really good question. Yeah, jazz musicians. They didn't like singers too much because you'd have singers, look, everybody can sing, okay? I mean, pretty much everybody can sing. So it's just to the degree that you sing. And there's a lot of singers that don't really know if they can sing or not. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like the good musicians are the ones that are always very self-critical. The ones that are not so good, they think they're pretty good sometimes, and that can be with singers. So there'd be many experiences where singers would come up, and you've got a very talented band, and the singer would kind of like, I hate to say this again, suck the oxygen out of the room. So in a lot of bands were dedicated to just being instrumental, particularly Maynard's band, Kenton's band, Buddy Rich too. He did a little bit of singing with his daughter Kathy, and Stan Getz' his daughter Beverly, who married my roommate Mike McGovern, the jazz trumpet player, and it just didn't work out too well. Not on those jazz bands. But did I answer your question? But certainly there's nothing wrong with singing.
That's what I expected to hear.
I'm sorry, but I have the unpopular job of keeping us on a schedule.
That's
so
all right. I'm getting the hook. I'm sorry I went so long. Are you hiding?
I'm hiding.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm like,
I see.
I was
Very nice.
between last night.
No, not at all.
We'd love to have you back sometime. We just want to give you a certificate to say thank you.
Wow.
And please come back sometime.
Yeah, you were very, very nice. I told her I'm going to walk around the neighborhood.
There you go. that and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee.
All right, thanks again. If you have any questions, I mean, I'll just be sitting around.
Thank you. Great. Please
Okay.
stay and listen to the other lectures. I think our technical guru